our lectionary Bible study, Quinquagesima Sunday, or the last Sunday after Epiphany. So in the newer lectionary arrangement, they have it so that the last always falls at the end, sort of like with the summertime, except that it's calibrated so it'll always work out that way. But anyway, so this set of readings will always be the one that comes before Ash Wednesday in the new arrangement. We call it Quinquagesima because in the 2019 prayer book you're allowed to keep pre-Lent. It doesn't give any instruction on how to do that, though. Either, maybe you pull out the old lectionary, the old prayer book, and do that. But it doesn't seem to say that, but then it doesn't say anything. So I think what you would just do is you would do all the other things associated with pre-Lent, like forego the Gloria, wear purple, use the tract, and so on. So that's what we do, keeping the collect and the readings the same. The collect comes from the collect, I believe, for Transfiguration from the 1928 proposed English prayer book, so which got all the way through until the very end and didn't pass Parliament, I believe. So it was something that was always authorized by the Church and basically was an alternative service book, if you will, but never had official status as the prayer book. You will never have a new prayer book. That was the last possibility, because it has to be approved by Parliament, and the problem is, there aren't any Anglicans left in Parliament. So it's just kind of is not feasible anymore. But they have what's called common worship now, which is like their final iteration of an alternative service book, which has become the predominant one.
Are there any of those books, old ones, still around?
Which one?
The one you were just talking
about. The 1928 prayer book? I do have a copy. I don't remember where I got it.
I mean, I've got a 1928.
It was
you're talking about
the English book, yeah. Book. It was a hand-me-down from some priest, probably.
I think I had it at one time, but I don't remember. I knew what you're talking about.
And all of these resources are nicely online. So you can go to a nice page. Justice is the key word to search for, Justice Prayer Book. So I think there's a Saint Justice. So it's like the Society of Saint Justice. Anyway. And it was, I think it might have been Father Fuller who was familiar with this collect, and when the idea came of moving the Transfiguration Gospel reading from Lent 2, where it is in the Roman Missal, up to right before Lent, as sort of the final Epiphany before we kind of go into this desert experience. He said, that collect from the 28 English book would fit nicely because it talks about this kind of being empowered by the encounter with Christ to be transformed ourselves, And so I think it was a good choice. So let's read the collect and then we'll talk more about the Sunday. Let us pray. O God, who before the passion of thine only begotten Son didst reveal his glory upon the holy mount, grant unto us that we, beholding by faith the light of his countenance, may be strengthened to bear our cross, and be changed into his likeness from glory to glory, through the same Jesus Christ, our Lord, who liveth and reigneth with thee, in the unity of the Holy Ghost, ever one God, world without end. Amen. So my little annual rant and pet peeve is that a lot of people in the ACNA sphere mistakenly call this the Feast of the Transfiguration, which is not, that's August 6th, and it's always August 6th, or Transfiguration Sunday, which is not as bad, but it gives the wrong impression. So for example, as I mentioned before, the Transfiguration narrative was read on the second Sunday of Lent. They don't call that Transfiguration Sunday. They don't wear white, that kind of thing. So there's been this tendency to, perhaps by those not as liturgically grounded in the history and whatnot, to either mistake this for the feast or to treat it like the feast. And I think, unfortunately, one of the things that lends toward that is in the new prayer book, every now and then they will have like a subheading subtitle on the collect. So just going through here, we have Advent, the first Sunday in Advent, second Sunday in Advent, third Sunday in Advent, the fourth Sunday in Advent, Annunciation. But it's not the Feast of the Annunciation. In fact, of the 3 years, only one time do you get the story that comes from that part of the narrative. So that one's really odd. But, you don't wear white. You don't call it the Feast of the Annunciation. It's the fourth Sunday in Advent. And then
What, are you saying that it's subtitled Annunciation?
yeah, there's like a little italic kind of subtitle. The Epiphany, there's a subtitle, the manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles. But nobody calls it the manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles Sunday. Well, it's not a Sunday, usually. Now, some of them make sense, like the first Sunday of Epiphany, the subheading is the baptism of the Lord. So it is, I don't know if feast is the right word, but it is the commemoration of the baptism of Jesus. And then the last Sunday of Epiphany, it says Transfiguration, but it's not the Feast of the Transfiguration. The fifth Sunday in Lent, Passion Sunday. Now, it has had that nickname for, long time, but it's still, the official title is the fifth Sunday in Lent. And it's given that title Passion Sunday because there's this kind of turning in the season of Lent where things intensify, we veil things, we drop the Gloria after that point. Basically, all the readings focus on, Holy Week stuff. Let's see, we have a couple of others here. Good Shepherd, fourth Sunday of Easter. Now, it has had that nickname for a long time, Good Shepherd Sunday, because the readings talk about Jesus, I am the Good Shepherd. But it's not like the Feast of the Good Shepherd. Although if your church was named, Good Shepherd Episcopal Church or something, then that would be your special day. But the title is just the fourth Sunday of Easter. Rogation Sunday is an odd one. That's another nickname. But it's actually not a Rogation Day. It's just, that's the Sunday right before the Rogation Days start. Day of Pentecost, Whit Sunday, that's sort of the alternative title that it has in England and maybe Northern Europe, I don't know. And then Proper 29, Christ the King, that makes sense.
Am I right in recollecting that Whit Sunday actually stands for White Sunday?
Right.
Because that was when baptisms were.
Mm-hmm.
People being baptized were in white robes.
Right. So, yeah, it makes a reference to people wearing white, and that wasn't the clergy, but that was the confirmands or the baptismal candidates.
Up, it was much more mixed in, because I grew up very familiar with calling it Whit Sunday.
Whit Sunday.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a more of an Anglicanism, if you will, Anglicism, whatever you say. Sort of like having, Sundays after Trinity rather than Sundays after Pentecost. Because that was a Northern Europe way of doing things. And I'm sure it was always kind of a trivia question. Why do they call this White Sunday when we're wearing red? Just one of those little things. Well, let's look at the readings. And so, given where our gospel is headed, and with things not basically going on a back-to-back sequence in the other readings, all of them probably relate thematically to the gospel. But let's look at Exodus. So we get the Exodus story from chapter 34. So this is after Moses has gone up on the mountain. He's been there for a long time. He is, I believe, come down from the mountain and seen the misbehavior and broken the 2 stone tablets with the whole golden calf episode. Goes back up on the mountain to get a new set of tablets. And so this is from that part of the narrative. Exodus 34, verses 29 to 35. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of the testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he had been talking with God. And when Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. And afterward all the people of Israel came near, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel what he was commanded, the people of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone. And Moses would put the veil upon his face again until he went in to speak with him. So a very curious and mysterious passage. If I'm not mistaken, my recollection is, I wish I would have thought to look this up earlier, that of course the first time with the first tablets that are broken, God made those tablets. But I have a recollection that for the second one, he had Moses make them. Let me see. I don't see the reference to that there, but certainly a part of the kind of backstory of this particular episode is that he says, Moses says, please let me see your glory. And then God says, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord, the sacred name, before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he added, you cannot see my face, for humans cannot see me and live. And then the Lord says, here, there's a place in the rock, you stand there, and when my glory passes by, I will put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I pass by. And then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen. Oh yeah, and then the beginning of chapter 34, the Lord said to Moses, cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets. So Moses gets the stone, but God is still the one who writes the commandments on them. So we have the same kind of proximity with the tablets to God that we had before, but we have perhaps a closer proximity to God when he has this encounter. I want to see your face, which there's a lot sort of embedded in that kind of symbolic language. To know the name and to use the name as to have a certain claim on someone, connection to them. Also, the face is summed up with so much about identity and personal familiarity and knowledge and knowing someone. And so there's this kind of plea on Moses. I want to know you, deeply, intimately, like a friend, without any distance between us. That is, it's kind of what he's asking for, and being able to see his face. So he's kind of gotten halfway there with being given his name and being able to use his name. But it's like, I want to get the rest of the way there. I want to see your face too. And so that language of seeing God as he is without any inter-obstructing medium has kind of been the language, especially in the Western Church, of theosis, of salvation, of sanctification and glorification, to see God as he is, to experience the beatific vision of God, that is to see God and that be a source of eternal happiness and fulfillment and blessedness in the soul. And so that's what he longs for. And God says, I get it, I sympathize with you, but not yet. So I will come near to you, but you can't look. I'll pass by and I'll make sure you don't look, but you can sort of see me as my glory recedes away. You can kind of get a partial glimpse, as it were. So a very fascinating and strange passage, kind of unsolved mysteries, Robert Stack kind of biblical passage. The kind of thing you would see specials of on the History Channel. You know, they're always talking about weird things. And another weird thing, of course, in this passage is this whole thing about the veil. And that's usually not a part of the depictions we see about Moses. And it is a part of what we are more familiar with is Moses having horns. Now, you think, what is that all about? Well, that's it's not like an anti-Semite sculpted a statue of Moses and put horns on it or something like that. It's because the same word for horn is used for rays of glory, rays of light. So this thing about Moses' face radiating, it might have been like a Latin mistranslation or something like that that led to that tradition. I'm not quite sure of the background on that. But famously, Michelangelo in his sculpture of Moses, he has two horns right there. I think, that's so odd. He looks like a bad guy.
The little one is back in the back, because I gave it for the rummage sale.
Oh, a little statue of
A little
Moses?
statue of Moses
With horns?
But I
Oh,
think
neat.
one of the horns broke off.
Oh, no. And it's also, you'll notice, like, especially you read through Revelation, and there's this, the beast with 10 horns, and there's all these references to horns again and again in the Bible to people and things that don't have horns. You think, what is that all about? Well, it's kind of a metaphor for power and magnificence and glory, radiating with glory. That is a horn. So it's always been kind of a metaphor for power and magnificence. So Moses, in his close encounter with God, begins to share some of his magnificence, his radiance, his glory. But it also seems to be a thing that's maybe as scary to be beholding on Moses' face. And I'm not sure about perhaps if this might be not just about sort of a radiance of glory, but almost like he has an awful sunburn type of thing when he gets close to God and comes out again. And people kind of are freaked out by that, and so he covers his face. Now, the whole covering of the face, it makes me think back to, because I had seen maybe a Doré Bible illustration somewhere where there was like this sort of curtain hanging in front of his face, there was this old Three Stooges short where three of them play doctors, and they have this kind of apparatus, instead of face masks over their mouth, it's like this little curtain, and they pull the string that opens up. And so that's what I think of when I think of the veiling of the face.
I've seen lots of Three Stooges, but I don't remember seeing that one.
I need to figure out
I'm sure
where that is.
David saw it. He loved it.
But picture like, Lawrence of Arabia, where you've got, the kind of turban and the winding thing that you can sort of wrap around your face to keep, the sand out of your eyes and nose and so on. So that's what we're talking about here, not something more like a curtain than we think of when we think of a veil. And also there's this fascination about the ark. Ancient cultures had great reference for radioactive meteorites and things like that. Perhaps there's something radioactive about the tablets. Either their origin or they're just their interaction with God. Because you notice what they put them in, the container is basically a radiation-proof box. So they put it in a wooden box covered with gold, I think inside and out. And then they keep that wrapped in layers and layers of leather when they transport it. And supposedly, according to legend, the Ark of the Covenant ended up in Ethiopia in St. Mary's Church in Axum.
Remember what happened to the people that opened it up, in the warehouse in Raiders.
Well, I know. And
It's a great scene.
and of course, it's taken into battle. a number of times, and it's used like a weapon in that regard. So if it had sort of like those sort of destructive properties about it, that kind of makes sense. But also it gets captured and taken away by the Philistines, and then it's like a plague upon them. It says that, the Philistines, when they got the ark, they started to have these skin diseases and all that kind of stuff, and it sounds like radiation sickness. And they're like, take it back.
Yeah. I was really surprised because I think it's in the Bible actually that I think it's Jeremiah where he takes it out. They're about to be taken to Babylon or whatever, and he takes the ark out and hides it in the desert, and it says, and it was never seen again. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, that's always been one of the great mysteries. Where did it go? If it's still around today, where is it? And the thing about the Ethiopians, they're guardian priest that stays in that. See, nobody goes into this chapel where it is. The whole thing is fenced off, and it's a chapel, and the only person that ever goes in there is the guardian. And so he lives there.
Just like the high priest.
Yeah, he lives there, and he takes care of the place. But whoever is appointed the guardian only lives a couple of years after he starts his job, and then he dies of cancer.
Wow.
And so another thing that kind of lends to the idea that maybe this is, still radiating.
Maybe it's real.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
All right, well, let's look at the Psalm, which is Psalm 99. It does not have an attribution to it, but it's one of those enthronement psalms. Let me see. It's only 9 verses, so we do all 9 of them. The Lord is king. Be the people ever so impatient. He sitteth between the cherubim. Be the earth never so unquiet. The Lord is great in Zion, and high above all people. They shall give thanks unto thy name, which is great, wonderful, and holy. The king's power loveth judgment. Thou hast prepared equity. Thou hast executed judgment and righteousness in Jacob. O magnify the Lord our God, and fall down before his footstool, for he is holy. Moses and Aaron among his priests, and Samuel among such as call upon his name. These called upon the Lord, and he heard them. He spake unto them out of the cloudy pillar, for they kept his testimonies and the law that he gave them. Thou hearest them, O Lord our God. Thou forgavest them, O God, though thou didst punish their wicked doings. O magnify the Lord our God, and worship him upon his holy hill, for the Lord our God is holy. And among these enthronement psalms, the idea of what is being enthroned in a physical sense is the Ark of the Covenant. So that signifies the locus of God's presence on the earth. When the glow of fire and smoke appears between the cherubim on the lid, that's when God is present. That's what would happen when Moses went into the tent, the tabernacle, to visit with him and get instructions and so on. So to enthrone God in his temple is basically to bring the ark into the temple. And that's what we find here, a celebratory song about that. So you can imagine this would be sung by a choir in the sort of dedication ceremony of placing the ark in its spot. He sitteth between the cherubim. Let the earth never be the earth never so unquiet.
I don't know if you get this on Instagram where they say it's a little thing that says, this is what people think angels look like.
Yeah.
And then, but this is what they really look like. And it's, the warrior.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Or, beast with multiple wings and just kind of a scary, terrifying sort of thing. Well, let's look at the epistle. So we had been going kind of back to back to back in 1 Corinthians 15. Now we back up a little bit to the 12th chapter, going into the 13th. And 1 Corinthians 13 is familiar to us as that wonderful ode to love. So that's where we end up. Beginning in verse 27. Now you are the body of Christ, and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church, first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then workers of miracles, then healers, helpers, administrators, speakers in various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But earnestly desire the higher gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers, and understand all the mysteries and all the knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For our knowledge is imperfect, and our prophecy is imperfect. But when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall fully understand fully, even as I've been fully understood. So faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. And it's nice that they begin that passage a little bit earlier than the beginning of chapter 13, so that we kind of get some of the context of why he's making these points. So it comes out of that whole discussion about their cliquishness and their kind of jealousy about various spiritual gifts, and everybody wants kind of the flashy ones, speaking in tongues and that sort of thing. And he's trying to kind of put things in perspective for them. And he makes the points earlier about, look, we're all a part of the body of Christ, and, you know, God blesses one person with a gift. It's not so much for them as it is for them to use to bless everyone else around them. So God, you know, blesses others through us. And so even when we get a gift, it's not so much for ourselves. It's not about ourselves. It's all about God. But, you know, we need to have perspective on all these gifts. We're all given different things, equipped differently. He gives some examples, you know, we're not all apostles, we're not all prophets, we don't all speak in tongues, etc., etc. But also these things are, each have their own purpose. And he says, earnestly desire the higher gifts. Let's see, which verse is that? Verse 31. The one right before we get into chapter 13. So in this context of like the different spiritual gifts and our jealousy and rivalry about them, he says, earnestly desire the higher gifts. Now, what are those? Well, if you'd asked the Corinthians before the letter, and maybe after the letter, I'm sure probably some didn't quite get it. You know, what are the higher gifts? It's the flashy ones, you know, the impressive ones, healing people, speaking in tongues, that sort of thing. But what is the higher gift? The gift that abides forever, the virtues. So he says, faith, hope, and love abide. That is, they don't end. It says, as for being apostles, there won't always be apostles. As for prophets, there won't always be prophets. We won't always be speaking in tongues. We won't always have miracle workers around. But as long as the church endures, which is for the rest of time and eternity, there will always be virtue. And all of us are given these gifts, faith, hope, and love. Those are infused at baptism. And the greatest of these is love, in a sense, because it brings the others into action. brings, like God breathing his spirit into Adam, and he becomes a living being, sort of like love breathes life into hope and faith, and makes them work for us. And so he has this wonderful ode to love, about how love, genuine love, the love of God, and the word here is agape, is patient and kind, not jealous, not boastful. It's godly in every facet that we could possibly imagine. Like God, love, genuine godly love bears all things and endures all things, and so on. Verse 11, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, and so on. So talking about, being able to appreciate these higher gifts, these things that are less flashy, but far more important, like the virtues. It's part of kind of growing up and maturing. When we're a child, we want the flashy toys, but when we're older, we appreciate what's really valuable, then we're content with these things that aren't so spectacular looking, but have more enduring value to them, like faith and hope and love. Also, in verse 12, that whole idea about seeing God and seeing ourselves. Now, in this day, our ability to see, to comprehend, to understand, to apprehend is somewhat limited. In a mirror that's all tarnished and scuffed up and hard to see. But one day, that vision will be clear. We will see God as he is, and perhaps for the first time, see ourselves as we really are. Now I know in part, then I shall understand fully, even as I have been fully understood. Let's see what church fathers have to say about this passage. Chrysostom says the Corinthian church was not the whole body by itself, but was a part of a worldwide community of faith. Therefore, the Corinthians ought to be at peace with the church in every other place, if it is a true member of the body. St. Basil says, a person living in solitary retirement will not readily discern his own defects, since he has no one to admonish or correct him with mildness and compassion. In fact, admonition from an enemy often produces in a prudent man the desire for amendment. And Ambrose says, a man with this charity fears nothing, for charity casts out fear. And that's 1 John 4:18. When fear is banished and cast out, charity endures all things, bears all things. One who bears all things through love cannot fear martyrdom. Clement of Rome says, love unites us to God. Love hides a multitude of sins. That's a reference to 1 Peter. Love puts up with everything and is always patient. There's nothing vulgar about love, nothing arrogant. Without love, nothing can please God. And then finally, Macrina says, love is first among all the activities connected with virtue and all the commandments of the law. And Paul makes that point, that love is a fulfillment of the law. If therefore the soul ever attains this love, it will need none of the others, having reached the fullness of its being. It seems that love alone preserves in itself the character of the divine blessedness, and knowledge becomes love because what is known by nature is beautiful. Or what is known is by nature beautiful.
You also have to know what love is. It's not a gooey feeling.
Yeah.
It's, St. Thomas Aquinas says it's willing the good of the other. Always. Always.
Of course, since we feel love so deeply, we often mistake love as a feeling, but it's more an act of the will, regardless of your feelings,
Right.
And so, like our gospel from last Sunday, love your enemies. That's agape. And so Jesus didn't say philo your enemies, have brotherly affection, good warm feelings about other people. He says love them, treat them with dignity, respect, charity, etc., in spite of the way you feel about them. Well, let's look at the gospel. So in each of the 3 years, we get an account of the Transfiguration, and it's from a different gospel each time. A is Matthew, B is Mark, and C is Luke. So this is Luke 9, verses 28 to 36. Now, well, let's back up, because he says 8 days after these sayings, after what? So what comes right before that? So in Luke chapter 9 earlier, we have Peter's confession about Jesus as Messiah, which is not nearly as lengthy as the one in Matthew that we're more familiar with. And then we get a series of predictions of his passion and also prediction of his resurrection and this admonition to take up your cross and follow me. And so this whole episode is kind of a turning point. So this wraps up the conclusion of the northern tour of the country, kind of kingdom campaign that he's on. And after this, he's going to head south, head to Jerusalem for Holy Week and all that stuff that comes there. And so, as we had in the collect about before the passion revealed his glory on the mount, strengthen us to bear our cross, to be changed into his likeness from glory to glory. So he had just called on them to bear their cross, take up their cross and follow him. So that's the reference that we get at the very beginning there. So Luke 9:28. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his countenance was altered, and his raiment became dazzling white. And behold, 2 men talked with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep. And when they wakened, they saw his glory, and the 2 men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is well that we are here. Let us make 3 booths, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. As he said this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud, saying, This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him. And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silence and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. So a very fascinating passage, and one of those like, what just happened? I'm not sure what to make of this. In the other Gospels, he says, don't talk about this. You can talk about it later, but not now. And this one, it's almost like we don't know what to say. It's like, I wonder if they even talked about it among themselves, Peter and James and John, when they're alone. It's like, did you see what I saw? Was it the same experience for you as it was for me? Did I hallucinate or something? It also makes me think about, we began the season with, we had Candlemas on a Sunday, the presentation in the temple. And in that passage, when Jesus is brought into the temple, there are 2 people who kind of recognize him for who he is. And they're both very old, wise, holy people, Simeon and Anna. And you think, well, how did they know? They just kind of get a message from God, like, there he is? Or was it something that they had this, power of discernment, that they could see things, as it were, that other people can't see normally, And so they were always going to see him whenever he got there, without any special revelation or whatever. And there is kind of lore about, certain very holy saints, they can see your aura or whatever, kind of the goodness or lack thereof about you. It makes me think of, because nobody else saw anything about the baby. It was just a normal-looking baby, normal-looking family. But Simeon and Anna recognized right away that this was different. It makes me think about Pentecost and the gift of the miracle of speaking in tongues. And it always puzzles me because it sounds more like the miracle is not in the tongues, but in the ears. So it's like Peter is giving his sermon, and everybody is hearing it in their own language. So it's not like the miracle is he's, speaking the same thing, 12 different times in 12 different languages, but the miracle is in the ear of the listener. But it says, speaking in tongues. It doesn't say the miracle of hearing. And then it makes me think about, well, is the miracle part more in, the eyes of Peter, James, and John? Like it was sort of like in the eyes of Simeon and Anna. And I don't know. But whatever it is, they see it for the first time. But if the miracle part is more in the eyes than it is out there, then they're just seeing something that's always been there and always will be there. But they have this limited time where it's apparent to them. Like if all of a sudden, your eyes could pick up infrared, which we normally don't see. And so, if I was seeing infrared, I could see everything that's warm. It would be more bright or visible or whatever. And we have, cameras that can pick up, radiation in that scale. And so you can see infrared. That's good for night vision, finding an animal in the dark in the woods or escaped prisoner or whatever, it'll show up very brightly because it's, you got a 98.6 person wandering through the woods that's 50 degrees, it stands out very, very easily. So are they able to just see something that's there all the time that they don't normally have the power to see? They see Moses and Elijah. How often do Moses and Elijah show up and talk with Jesus? Is that like a daily thing, and they just are able to see it for the first time? So it kind of makes me wonder if it's sort of like, the miracle of tongues versus the miracle of ears. Is this kind of more of a miracle of eyes versus a miracle of radiation or what have you? I don't know. Either way, it kind of works out the same, that they see something that they normally don't see. And his sort of like his guard is down. And Luke is the only one who mentions prayer. And so Luke makes the point to say that it was as he was praying that the appearance of his countenance was altered, and his raiment, his clothing, became dazzling white. And so I gather from that, and especially with the background of the other versions in the other Gospels, that Jesus' face shone. And so we immediately think back to Moses, and then we think back to where did Moses get that radiating glory? Well, it came from his encounter with God. So it's like they see the divinity within him for the first time. And even his clothing, things close to him that belonged to him kind of shared in his glory. And of course, clothing for a king, for example, is kind of inherent in the identity of a royal figure. So that would kind of make sense. I forget which one it is, maybe Matthew, became whiter than any fuller soap could ever bleach. I've mentioned before about like the white vestments, and so you lay down the chasuble, the white chasuble, and then you put the alb on top of that. You think, oh, that's not really white. You see how dark it is and compared with the white alb. But even if you get an old alb and you lay a new alb on top of it, how much whiter that is compared with the old alb that's far whiter than the kind of ivory silk brocade or damask. So there's white and then there's white. It blows me away about how many different colors of white paint you can buy.
Yeah.
It's probably like 200 different whites.
How do they come up with those names?
Yeah. And how do you figure out if you're going to buy some to match some white paint? You just have to do the whole thing every time you paint it? You can't match it. I don't know.
This is back to you paint. y'all have.
Mhm.
I don't
Well,
paint.
you have to keep your paint chip forever.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
you can always take it back and find the original. That's how it works.
Or
It's-
the can that's got that much
Yeah, that's
left.
right.
It still annoys me to this day when 'cause we had a flood at the house and they came out and we did the flooring and everything, and part of that was the baseboards and the frames around the doors, and so they, it's not the same white as the door. It's different. And it just like bugs me.
And you know.
But I have yet to be motivated enough to go buy paint, because it's like, well, I want to buy paint to make it match, but then it's
You're the
how do I
only
get
one.
it to match? I gotta take the thing off the wall and bring it in there.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get a bunch of paint cards, and I guess maybe I can narrow it down close enough so at least I can't tell, but
You're probably the only one that notices it that far.
probably.
Yeah.
If I really want it to match, then I got to paint the doors and all the molding in the house,
That's
That's right.
and that's what keeps me
Doing it.
really from bothering in the first place. Let's see, what else to point out? We notice here that it is around the Feast of Booths. Of course, that's why the Feast of the Transfiguration is in August, because it's that time of year. So this is commemorating, sometimes it's called Tabernacles or Sukkoth, commemorating the journey through the wilderness. Once upon a time, we didn't have a home. We were kind of travelers, nomads, wandering through the wilderness. And it kind of is a healthy reminder to appreciate the things that we have, land, house, that sort of thing.
It's when you go build a shelter up on your roof, a roof.
Mhm.
You build something to sleep under
Yeah.
on your roof to represent sleeping
Yeah.
in the wilderness.
So it's kind of like for, I don't know, a week or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's long.
Let's go rough it and live like we
And you
used to
don't-
in the Exodus story.
and you eat up there and and it's a if you've ever seen, I just saw this in a video of Jerusalem getting ready for this. It's like every vendor, there's tons of vendors selling branches and rags and scraps of cloth and all the food that you're gonna, I mean, it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
And then very unique. I can only imagine if we, camped out in the backyard for a week every year. Let's see, what else? Oh, Moses and Elijah. It's a good, perhaps, connection to make with the epistle, and I pointed this out in the sermon a few go-arounds. Faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So we might say that the greatest of these with Jesus, Moses, and Elijah is Jesus, incarnate love. God is love. He's come down in human flesh. Faith makes me think of Moses, the great teacher of the law, and so on. Elijah, the great miracle worker, makes me think of hope. So we might have perhaps a little bit of a shoehorn connection, but I don't think it's a big stretch. Faith, hope, and love presented to us, and the greatest of these is love. Also, you have this legend about, Elijah will appear again when the Messiah comes. And what do we have here? Elijah appears again. The Messiah has come. And of course, we have that line at the end that's sort of parallel with the epiphany that happens at his baptism, where the cloud descends. They recognize this perhaps as a manifestation of God's presence, because that's throughout the Old Testament. Whenever God is close, whenever he's going to speak, there's a cloud and fire hiding, cloaking him, veiling him. So the cloud descends and they're afraid. It overshadows them. A voice says the same things at the baptism. This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. Let me see. Oh, and I believe that Luke is the only one, verse 31, who mentions that Jesus is talking with Moses and Elijah about his crucifixion. So it says, Moses and Elijah appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was to accomplish at Jerusalem. And the word that is used there is his exodus, that he's going to accomplish at Jerusalem. So that his exodus from this life, his death. But of course, there's so much about the Exodus story, Passover, that is the Easter story, about the death and resurrection and the marking of the blood and the Passover lamb and all that stuff. And of course, throughout the world, unlike in English, Easter is not called Easter, it's called Passover or Pascha. Thus the Paschal candle, so on. Okay.
Thank you.
Guess that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks.